It was almost 2 in the morning when I stepped off my sanitation truck, my boots sinking into the soaked gravel beside the empty bus stop at the edge of our small Oregon town. Rain hammered the pavement so hard it bounced back like needles. I tugged the collar of my jacket closer to my neck, still thinking about the overtime shift I had just finished and the lunchbox I needed to pack for my daughter Rosie only 4 hours from now. That was when I saw her. A young woman stood by the flickering bus shelter light, soaked through every layer of clothing hair plastered to her cheeks, barefoot arms wrapped tight around herself as if holding her ribs in place. She spun around the second she sensed me, eyes wide and red like she had cried for hours. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Please stay back," and I froze, hands up instantly. "Ma'am, are you okay?" I asked, keeping my distance. She shook her head, stumbling backward until she hit the metal post behind her, trembling so violently I could almost hear her teeth chatter over the rain. Before she could answer, a patrol car rolled past slowly, its spotlight sweeping across both of us. The officer inside paused, rolled down the window, and aimed the beam directly at my chest. "Is this man bothering you, Mom?" he asked, his voice suspicious. She stared at the ground, too terrified to speak. My throat tightened. "No, sir," I said quickly, "just trying to help." The officer watched me a long, uncomfortable moment before driving off, though the skepticism in his eyes stayed with me like a bruise. The girl exhaled in short, panicked bursts. "He might come back," she whispered. "I cannot stay here. I have nowhere to go." For a long second, everything in me locked up. I had rules for myself. I had a 6-year-old daughter sleeping in a tiny bedroom with a unicorn nightlight. I could not just bring strangers into that house. The world was dangerous. I had learned that the hard way when I lost my wife. But then I looked at the girl again, really looked. Her bare feet on the freezing concrete, the purple bruise along her wrist, the way her shoulders curled inward like someone trying to make themselves invisible. Something old and painful twisted inside me. Years ago, I ignored someone who asked for help and paid for that silence with a guilt that never left. My throat tightened at the memory. I did not know this girl or her story, but I knew what it felt like to be stranded in the dark with nobody willing to take a chance on you, and I could not be that person again. The girl swayed on her feet and caught herself on the bus stop bench. Her voice was barely a breath. "Please, I cannot go back." The rain poured harder as if urging me to decide. Finally, I opened the passenger door of my old Chevy and stepped back. "Get in," I said quietly. She hesitated, then climbed in slowly like an animal expecting a trap. I kept my voice level as I buckled myself in. "I will get you somewhere warm. Just somewhere safe for the night." She nodded but kept staring down at her hands. The drive was silent except for her soft shivers and the wipers beating against the storm. When we reached my driveway, I paused with the engine running. "Stay here a moment," I said. "I need to set some things straight inside." I slipped into the house, locking my wallet and keys in a small safe bolted inside the closet. I checked Rosie's door, making sure she was still asleep, then grabbed a blanket and towel. As I walked back out, the girl stepped under my porch light, and that was when I noticed it glinting beneath her tangled hair. A sapphire earring, small but unmistakably expensive. The kind worn by people whose world was nothing like mine. For a moment, confusion and caution punched through my chest. What was a girl with jewelry like that doing barefoot at a bus stop in the rain at 2 in the morning? She caught me staring and immediately covered her ear with her hand. "Sorry," she murmured, pulling the wet hair across her face. It broke something in me, not suspicion, but a deeper, heavier curiosity. I handed her the towel. "Inside is warm. You can take the couch." She stepped past me slowly, dripping onto the hardwood, her eyes scanning the tiny living room like she had never seen a space so small. When she spoke, her voice was barely above the storm outside. "Why are you doing this?" I thought of Rosie asleep with her stuffed llama. I thought of my wife's last words telling me to raise our daughter kind, even when the world is not. "Because you looked like you needed help," I said simply. "And I would want someone to do the same for my girl if she were ever out there alone." Her eyes flickered, then softened in a way that made the room feel smaller, warmer somehow. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and whispered "thank you" as if the words hurt. I nodded, unsure what else to say. I did not know her name or her story or why she ran. I only knew one thing with absolute certainty. This decision would change everything. I have lived most of my 34 years on the quiet edges of Oregon where forests swallow sound and people keep to themselves, and where the biggest dreams are the ones you can afford to fit into the back of a pickup truck. I never planned on becoming a sanitation worker, but life did not wait for plans, and after my wife Anna died, I took the first job that guaranteed health insurance for Rosie and a schedule that allowed me to walk her to school before my night shift. Most days, I moved through the city before dawn, wearing a neon vest and pushing a broom through streets people pretended cleaned themselves. Folks rarely met my eyes. Some thanked me quietly, but most stepped aside like I was part of the scenery, or worse, like I was something they would rather not think about. I learned not to take it personally, even though some mornings stung more than I ever admitted. I kept to myself, swept up the same corners every morning, and reminded myself that dignity does not come from a shirt collar. It comes from showing up. Still, there were days the weight of everything pressed down hard. Our trailer sagged from years of storms and neglect. The heater rattled when it worked at all. The roof leaked in the winter. The landlord reminded me once a month that rent was due and always said it with the same sigh, as if he was disappointed the world had made someone like me his responsibility. Bills arrived faster than paychecks, and I rationed groceries with a precision most people never think about, choosing between meat or fresh fruit, making mental calculations down every aisle. Rosie never complained, though she noticed more than I wished she would. She always offered me the last cookie, always said she was full when she was not, and always tucked her stuffed llama under my arm when she sensed I could not sleep. Losing Anna had changed both of us, but Rosie carried her grief in soft ways, while mine came out like a quiet war fought every day against the same invisible enemy: exhaustion, debt, loneliness, fear. At work, customers sometimes made jokes they thought I could not hear, calling people like me the bottom rung. One man yelled at me because the trash compactor near his store was jammed, and he shouted as if I had personally offended him by existing. I never yelled back. I could not afford the luxury of pride. I had a little girl depending on me and bills depending on my sanity. The worst memories always came at night when everything slowed enough for me to think. Years ago, before I met Anna, I once walked past a woman sitting on a curb crying. She asked for help, said she needed a ride to somewhere safe. I hesitated. I told myself I was late for work. I told myself she would be fine. I walked away. 2 days later, I learned she had been attacked not far from where I left her. I never forgot that. I never forgave myself. I told myself I would never again turn my back on someone clearly in need, even if it scared me, even if it cost me time or comfort. That promise echoed in my mind as I cleaned city streets with numb fingers and tried to ignore how alone I felt most nights. People think men like me are used to silence, but the truth is, silence can bruise. It bruised every time a stranger assumed I was dangerous. It bruised when other parents avoided eye contact at school drop-offs. It bruised when a woman once pulled her purse closer as I walked by, even though I was just picking up Rosie from class. There was an ache beneath all of it, an ache I disguised with routine. Make breakfast, tie Rosie's shoes, work nights, wash uniforms, pray nothing breaks, pretend I am stronger than I am. That was my rhythm. A working man's quiet war. And in that war, I learned to measure victories differently. A hot meal on the table, a laugh from Rosie, a night without a shut-off notice. A moment where I felt like I was not failing at this life I never asked for, but am determined to honor. That is why the girl from the bus stop shook something loose in me. Her trembling, her eyes, the bruise on her wrist, the fear she carried like it weighed more than her whole body. She reminded me of every moment I wished someone had stepped in for me, or for Anna, or for that woman long ago. She reminded me that doing the right thing is rarely convenient and almost never comfortable. She reminded me that even a tired man fighting a quiet war still has the power to choose who he becomes. And when I look back now, I realize this part of the story, the part where I am trying to survive one day at a time, was exactly what made the next part possible. Because when a broken stranger walks into a broken home, sometimes something miraculous happens. The cracks recognize each other, and the healing begins. I woke before the sun, as I always did, my body conditioned by years of night shifts and worry. But for the first time in a long while, I woke with a jolt, the kind that comes from remembering a stranger is sleeping on your couch. For a second, I wondered if she had left in the middle of the night, slipped out quietly the way stray cats do when they realize a warm place might come with expectations. But then I heard the soft sound of breathing, the faint creak of the couch springs, and the faintest hum of the space heater I had dragged closer to her before going to bed. I stepped into the living room and saw her curled up beneath the blanket, still wearing the sweatshirt I had given her. Her wet shoes placed neatly beside the couch like she was afraid to make a mess. Her hair had dried in tangled waves around her face, and for the first time I saw how young she looked beneath all that fear, maybe mid-20s, maybe younger, and unquestionably out of place in my old trailer. I was about to tiptoe to the kitchen when I heard tiny footsteps behind me, and Rosie whispered, "Daddy, why is there a princess on our couch?" I nearly choked on my breath. Rosie rubbed her eyes with the back of her hand, her curls sticking in every direction, and stared at the stranger like she was a character from her bedtime stories. Before I could answer, the girl stirred, blinking against the thin morning light that sifted through our torn blinds. When her eyes met Rosie's, she didn't flinch or tense up like she had last night. Instead, she smiled. A real smile, small, fragile, but real. "Good morning, Sunbeam," she said softly. I froze. Rosie giggled immediately, like the word had been waiting her whole life to land in her ears. "You called me Sunbeam," she said. "Nobody calls me that." The girl shrugged weakly and said, "It suits you." I stood there feeling both protective and disarmed, unsure how a stranger barely able to stand last night could speak to my daughter like she had known her forever. I told Rosie to go wash up, and I motioned for the girl to sit up. "I made some oatmeal if you want," I said, trying to sound normal, trying not to stare at the fresh bruise on her shoulder that her slipping blanket exposed. She pulled the fabric back up quickly. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice still shaky. She moved carefully like every limb hurt. When she sat at the small kitchen table, I noticed her posture, her diction when she finally spoke, even the way she held the spoon awkwardly but with a certain grace. It was the kind of grace you do not learn growing up broke. It was the kind you inherit from private schools and nanny lessons and summers abroad. Nothing about her matched the story of someone stranded in the rain at a bus stop at 2 in the morning. Rosie climbed onto the chair beside her and started eating without waiting for permission. She kept glancing at our guest with fascination. "Are you feeling better now?" the girl asked her gently. Rosie nodded with her mouth full. "Daddy says sick people need warm food." The girl smiled again, though this time her eyes glistened as if warmth were something she hadn't been given freely in a long time. I leaned forward. "Look, you do not have to tell me everything, but you should tell me if someone hurt you," I said. She stiffened. "It's complicated," she whispered. Complicated is the word people use when the truth is too painful or too dangerous. She tried to stand after breakfast, but winced when she put weight on her right foot, and I saw then the cut near her ankle and the faint stitched pattern of bruises running up her calf like a history written in places no one was meant to see. Rosie noticed too and frowned. "Does it hurt?" The girl nodded. "A little." Rosie reached out and touched her arm gently. My mom used to say pain feels smaller if someone sees it. The girl froze at the word mom, like it punched the air out of her chest. She whispered, "I wish I had known someone like your mom." I felt something twist inside me because Anna would have opened this door even faster than I had. She would have wrapped this girl in a blanket, made her tea, and told her that nobody deserves to shake in the cold alone. And maybe that was why I had brought her home last night. I was trying to be the kind of man Anna believed I could be. After breakfast, the girl asked if she could help clean, but when she reached for a cup, her hand trembled. "Sit," I said firmer than I meant to. She obeyed instantly like she was used to following orders, another sign she didn't grow up like us. When she asked where the bathroom was, I pointed her down the hall. She paused in the doorway and looked back at me as if searching my face for permission, or safety, or both. "Thank you for letting me stay," she said. No one ever just helps anymore. I didn't know how to answer that because I didn't know what kind of world she came from where help was something you had to earn. While she showered, Rosie tugged on my sleeve and whispered, "Daddy, she looks sad inside her heart." I sighed. She does. Are we keeping her? Rosie asked innocently. I shook my head. She just needs a place to rest. Rosie leaned closer. Maybe she needs more than rest. Maybe she needs us. Her words hit harder than they should have because for the first time I realized how long it had been since our home felt full, how long it had been since another adult voice echoed off these walls. And even though I knew letting a stranger into our lives was risky, even though part of me stayed braced for something to go wrong, another part of me wondered if this morning was the beginning of something we had not felt since Anna died. A shift, a warmth, a small fragile possibility that maybe, just maybe, we were no longer alone. I should have known the neighborhood would notice because nothing stays quiet in a small Oregon trailer park, not even the sound of a stranger's footsteps on your porch. By noon, the rumors had already started spreading faster than wildfire through dry pine. I was in the driveway fixing the loose hinge on the mailbox when Mrs. Halpern, who'd lived 3 trailers down since the 90s and considered herself the local FBI, shuffled over with her tiny dog that hated everyone except her. She gave me a look that wasn't quite a greeting. "Saw someone in your kitchen this morning," she said, tightening her coat like gossip was cold air she needed protection from. Not the little one, a grown woman. Long hair, pretty, looked troubled. I wiped my hands on my jeans. She just needed a place to stay for the night. Halpern sniffed. "Caleb, honey, you shouldn't be bringing women into your home. You got a child in there." "Folks talk." I felt my jaw clench. Let them talk. But the truth was, it stung because I had spent years trying to protect Rosie from the way people looked at us, the way they assumed a single dad in an old trailer must be irresponsible or desperate. Now those eyes were on Sienna too, and she hadn't done anything but survive a storm. When I went back inside, I found her sitting at the table, folding the blanket she'd used, like she wanted to erase any sign she'd ever been here. She looked up quickly when she saw me reading my expression before I could hide it. "I should leave," she whispered. "People are asking questions." I shook my head. "You don't have to go. You're safe here." She held the blanket tighter. Safe is relative. I didn't know what that meant, but the way she said it made my stomach turn. Rosie came running in with her crayons, happy as ever. Sienna knelt beside her, and they colored together while I stepped outside again to fix the porch light. That was when the second wave of judgment hit. A woman from the next block slowed her car, rolled down the window, and called out, "Caleb, you should think of your daughter before letting strangers into your house." Her tone wasn't cruel, just laced with that self-righteous concern people use when they want to sound like they care, but really just want to feel superior. I wanted to tell her that being broke doesn't make you careless, that poverty doesn't equal stupidity, that letting someone sleep on my couch wasn't a threat to Rosie, but maybe a lesson for her about kindness. Instead, I said nothing and she drove off, convinced she had done her community duty. By the time I got back inside, Sienna was standing by the sink washing dishes even though I told her she didn't need to. She moved carefully, wincing every few minutes like her shoulder still hurt. "You don't have to do that," I said. She kept scrubbing anyway. "I want to." But her voice sounded like someone trying to repay a debt they never asked for. In the afternoon, she asked if she could walk to the laundromat down the block to look for work. She didn't want to be a burden. I hated that word. Burden. As if needing help made her heavy. I walked her there, keeping Rosie's hand in mine, and occasionally glancing at Sienna, who seemed overwhelmed by every noise, every passing car, every pair of eyes that lingered too long on her. At the laundromat, the owner barely looked up when I asked if he needed help. But when he glanced at Sienna and saw how exhausted she looked, he tossed her an apron. "Clock starts now," he said. "Just like that. No questions, no welcome, just work." Sienna took it with both hands and whispered thank you, like he'd given her a miracle. Watching her behind the counter that day broke something in me and mended something else at the same time. She moved slowly at first, then faster as the day wore on, folding and wiping and lifting heavy baskets until her arms trembled. A customer snapped at her for mixing whites and colors even though she hadn't. Another shoved 3 giant bags at her and said, "Don't wrinkle anything." She handled all of it with silence so tight it looked painful. When I picked her up after my shift, she walked toward the truck like every bone in her body hurt. "Rough day?" I asked gently. She gave a tired laugh. I didn't know towels could weigh this much. I nodded toward the store. Folks can be harsh. She looked down at her shoes, soaked and falling apart. Yeah, but it's okay. I'm earning something. That feels new. We drove home in quiet until I stopped at the discount store and grabbed a pair of decent work shoes. Nothing fancy, just something that wouldn't destroy her feet. When I handed them to her, she froze like I'd given her diamonds. I can't take these, she said. They're too much. They cost $19, I replied. You need them. Her eyes flickered, softening. Thank you, she whispered. That night, while Rosie slept, I saw Sienna step onto the porch alone. She stood there with the shoes in her hands like she wasn't sure she deserved them, like receiving kindness was harder than receiving cruelty. I watched her through the window as she pressed the heel of her palm against her eyes, wiping away the kind of tears you cry only when someone gives you something you haven't earned but desperately need. And I realized then that the world had judged her long before my neighbors did. They just didn't see the bruises she carried on the inside. I didn't know who she really was. I didn't know what she was running from, but I knew the strangers weren't the ones I needed to fear. The loudest danger tonight came from the quiet lies people told about her, about me, about anyone who didn't fit their narrow idea of safety. Wrong assumptions weren't just inconvenient. They were cruel, and they were already changing the course of our lives. I found out the truth in the most ordinary and humiliating way possible, not through a confession or some dramatic revelation, but because a piece of jewelry slipped out of a pile of freshly washed clothes and landed right at my feet like fate dropping a bomb. It was late evening, and the laundromat smelled like detergent and metal the way it always did. Sienna was folding towels with her sleeves rolled up, her hair pulled into a low, messy knot, looking nothing like a runaway heiress, and everything like a girl trying her hardest to stay invisible. I had stopped by after my shift with Rosie perched on my hip, just checking in on her. I was talking to the owner about fixing his broken dryer when I heard a soft clink on the floor. I turned, and there it was. A delicate sapphire necklace, thin as moonlight, the pendant the color of deep ocean water. I knew luxury when I saw it, even if I couldn't afford it. But what caught my breath wasn't the gemstone. It was the engraving on the clasp, Harrington. A name that didn't exist in my world. A name that belonged to skyscrapers, galleries, endowments, gala invitations, and men who never washed their own plates. My first instinct was disbelief. My second was anger. Sienna, I said quietly. Her head snapped up. The moment her eyes landed on the necklace in my hand, her entire face drained of color. She moved toward me too quickly, like she'd burn herself if she didn't grab it right away. Where did you, It fell out of your laundry, I said. My voice came out rougher than I meant it to. You want to tell me why someone who says she's broke is carrying something worth more than my truck? She froze. Pain flickered across her face, followed by panic. She reached for the necklace, but I pulled it back slightly, not to punish her, but because I needed answers, needed honesty. Needed something real to hold on to. Caleb, please, she whispered. It's complicated. Everything with you is complicated, I shot back. Who are you really? She swallowed hard, eyes glistening like she was holding back a storm. I'm not who you think I am. Then tell me who you are, I said. Because you showed up barefoot at a bus stop at 2 a.m. wearing earrings worth half my rent. That doesn't make sense. Her breath hitched. She seemed ready to speak, but a shadow fell across the window. A man stood outside, camera raised. Before I could react, the flash pierced the glass like lightning. Sienna gasped and stumbled back so hard she hit the counter. The man lifted his phone again, snapping pictures in rapid succession, like he'd found exactly what he'd been paid to track. Found her, he muttered. And that was all it took for everything inside me to shift. I didn't understand who she was not yet, but I understood fear. Real fear. The kind that takes over your whole body. The kind she had lived in for days. Without thinking, I grabbed her arm gently but firmly. Come on. Caleb, wait. Now, I said. The laundromat owner looked up confused as I pulled her toward the back exit. Rosie reached for me with wide eyes, and I lifted her with one arm while guiding Sienna with the other. The man rushed toward the door, but I slammed it shut and locked it before he could reach us. We ran through the narrow alley behind the building, our feet splashing through dirty puddles, Sienna stumbling because she was still wearing those worn-out shoes she insisted were fine. Behind us, the man shouted frustrated as he circled the building. "Keep going," I said, breath tight in my chest. "Don't stop." I didn't know where we were running to. I just knew we had to get away. The three of us cut across a yard, ducked between two fences, and finally reached my truck. I pushed Sienna inside, buckled Rosie in with shaking hands, and jumped into the driver's seat. "Caleb," she whispered, voice cracking. "I'm sorry." "Save it," I said, starting the engine. "Just tell me if we need to watch for anyone else." She didn't answer. She just stared out the window with pure dread pooling in her eyes. That was the moment I realized something important. She wasn't lying to hurt me. She wasn't hiding because she was dangerous. She was hiding because someone else was. When we finally reached home, I parked a block away and turned off the engine. My hands were still shaking. She sat curled in the seat holding the necklace so tightly her knuckles turned white. I spoke first. "I don't care if you're rich," I said softly. "I care that you weren't honest." Tears filled her eyes instantly. "I didn't lie," she whispered. "I left things out. That's the same thing I said." She flinched like I'd struck her. Rosie tugged on her sleeve from the back seat. "Sunbeam," she said softly. "Don't cry." Sienna covered her mouth as a tear finally slipped free. "I never meant to hurt anyone," she choked out. "I just wanted to be somewhere real for a little while." The silence stretched between us, aching and fragile. Then before I could figure out what to say, a sleek black car turned onto our street. It moved slowly, deliberately, like a shark cutting through dark water. Sienna stiffened instantly. Her fingers tightened around the necklace. Her voice dropped to a terrified whisper. "That's them." And in that moment, every question I had became irrelevant. Because whoever she truly was, whatever she was running from the danger, had just found us. And everything was about to change. The black town car rolled toward us with the slow, deliberate certainty of a verdict already decided, its headlights slicing through the dark like two unblinking eyes. And the moment I saw Sienna shrink into herself, shoulders curling inward as if bracing for an impact she knew too well, I understood that whoever sat inside that car was not just looking for her, but owned a part of her life in a way I never could. I told her to stay in the truck, but she whispered, "It won't matter," and before I could stop her, she opened the door, stepping out into the cold night with the resignation of someone stepping back into a cage they had once escaped from. By the time I rounded the hood of the truck to reach her, the rear door of the car opened with a soft, expensive click, and a tall man in a charcoal coat stepped out, flanked by two men built like statues carved from pure authority. His presence hit the air like pressure. Silver hair, combed back black gloves, a face sharp enough to cut glass, and eyes that assessed everything and dismissed anything beneath his standards. He didn't need an introduction, but he gave one anyway as he stepped closer. Voice smooth and commanding. "I am Winston Harrington," he said, as if the name should end the conversation before it began. Then his gaze shifted to me, and the temperature of the night dropped 5 degrees. "You are the man who has been harboring my daughter." Harboring. Like she was contraband. A problem. An inconvenience. I felt something hot rise in my chest. "I gave her a couch," I said evenly. "Not a cage." He stepped closer, not in aggression, but in the way a judge leans forward before delivering a sentence. "You think you understand her situation. You do not. My daughter is not meant to be here." He looked around at the worn fences, the quiet, the absence of marble floors or chauffeurs. The disdain wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. Sienna stood between us, trembling. "Dad, stop." He ignored her. "Get in the car," he said. His voice was soft, but it carried the weight of a lifetime of being obeyed. She didn't move. He lifted a brow. "Sienna." Her breath hitched like the sound alone was enough to unlock every old wound. I stepped forward, placing myself half in front of her before I fully processed the impulse. "She chooses," I said. His eyes flicked to me with genuine surprise. not anger. Amusement. You misunderstand your role here, he said. You do not belong in this discussion. She's a grown woman. I said, my voice steady, even though my pulse hammered. If she wants to go with you, she will say so. If she doesn't, she stays. Sienna shook her head weakly. Caleb. No, I said gently. You don't owe him anything until you speak for yourself. Winston exhaled like he was dealing with a child refusing to come inside from recess. My daughter is vulnerable, he said. She is not capable of making a rational decision right now. She is capable, I said. You just don't like her decisions. Something flickered in his eyes. Annoyance, fear, pride, all tangled together. You don't know what's best for her, he said. I know she was freezing barefoot at a bus stop at 2 a.m, I shot back. And I know no one came for her then. For the first time, Winston's mask cracked. Just a fraction. But enough. Sienna winced as if the truth itself had claws. Dad, she whispered. Please listen. He didn't. Or maybe he couldn't. He lifted his chin, reclaiming authority. You are getting in the car, he said again. This ends tonight. She closed her eyes like the weight of the world pressed down on her shoulders, and then she said the words I had dreaded but expected. I have to go, Caleb. My chest tightened. She avoided my eyes, looking instead at the ground like the truth was too heavy to face. I don't want to, she whispered, but I have to. The world seemed to tilt. Rosie's voice broke the moment like a fragile thread snapping. She had woken from the truck and now stood beside me in her little pajamas, rubbing her eyes. Sunbeam, she said, voice tiny and trembling. You're leaving. The look on Sienna's face shattered me. She crouched down and opened her arms. Rosie ran into them, clinging tight around her neck. Don't go, Rosie begged. We can make pancakes again. I'll share my stickers. Sienna's tears finally fell soft and silent, dripping into Rosie's hair. Sweetheart, she whispered, voice breaking. You're the first person who made me feel safe in a long time. Rosie sobbed harder. I swallowed hard, staring at the street, trying not to feel the ache in my chest. Winston looked away like emotion was something he had forgotten how to process. Sienna stood slowly, wiping her face. Caleb, she said, and just my name in her voice made something inside me twist. Thank you. For everything. I nodded because I couldn't trust my voice. She walked toward the car like she was walking toward a life she no longer fit into. Halfway there, she turned back, eyes shimmering in the streetlight. For a moment, I thought she might run back to us. For a moment, I thought love or freedom or courage might win. But some wars are fought in silence and lost in the heart long before the battle begins. She got into the car. The door closed with a soft thud that sounded louder than thunder. The car pulled away, disappearing into the dark. Rosie cried until she fell asleep against my shoulder. I stood there long after the taillights vanished, long after the street went quiet again, holding my daughter and feeling the emptiness settle inside the house before we even went inside. And that night, for the first time in years, I prayed for something I wasn't sure I deserved, that she would come back. Not because we saved her, but because maybe she needed us as much as we needed her. The house felt different the second we stepped inside, as if the air itself had thinned, like something warm had slipped out through the cracks and left nothing but the echo of its absence behind. And even though I tried to keep my footsteps quiet so I wouldn't wake Rosie again, every board creaked louder than usual. Every shadow stretched longer, and the silence pressed against my ears until it almost buzzed. After I laid Rosie in her bed and pulled the faded quilt up to her chin, she reached out in her sleep, whispering the word, Sunbeam, and her fingers closed around nothing. I stood there longer than I should have, watching her eyelids twitch, her breathing uneven, her tiny hand still searching the space next to her as if Sienna might step out of the dark and tuck her in again. When I finally walked back into the living room, the house felt hollow. Her blanket was still on the couch, folded in a neat rectangle from the morning before she left, and her shoes sat near the door, the muddy ones I'd bought her when the old ones were falling apart. They were still there, untouched, as if she planned to slip back into them at any moment. Except she had left barefoot, stepping into a world I wasn't part of. I tried to distract myself by cleaning, by busying my hands, by fixing a loose cabinet hinge I had ignored for months, but everything reminded me of her. The mug she always reached for, the way she folded Rosie's socks in tiny rolls, the scent of lavender shampoo lingering faintly in the bathroom steam. Even the couch cushion was dented in the shape of her body, a reminder of how small she looked the first night she slept there, curled up like she expected to be told to leave at any moment. By midnight, I gave up trying to sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with the soft hum of the old refrigerator filling the silence. I kept imagining the sound of the town car door closing, the way she wouldn't look at me when she said she had to go, the torn look in her eyes when Rosie cried, the way Winston stood behind her like a shadow made of money and expectations. A man like him didn't need to raise his voice to force someone to obey. He had been doing it her entire life. But what haunted me most was the fact that she didn't fight. Not really. She accepted it, like someone who had been trained to bow long before they learned to stand. I rubbed my face and tried to shake it off, but the image of her walking away replayed over and over. The next morning, I pretended everything was normal. That is what single fathers do. I made Rosie's lunch, brushed her curls, buttoned her coat, and forced a smile when she asked if Sienna was coming back today. I said maybe. It was the only truth I had left. On the walk to the bus stop, Rosie held my hand so tightly it hurt. Usually, she hummed or skipped or stopped to look at worms after the rain, but not today. She walked silently, eyes on the ground, as if the entire world had gotten colder overnight. When she got on the bus, she turned back, lips trembling. "Can you ask Sunbeam to come for pancakes?" she whispered. The bus pulled away before I could answer. Back at work, I moved through my shift like a ghost. Every street I swept reminded me of the night I found her. Every alley reminded me of the life she'd been running from. A coworker asked if I was sick. I said I was fine. A lie was easier. When I returned home, the house greeted me with that same emptiness, like it had taken on a personality of its own, and that personality was grief. I walked from room to room as if expecting her to appear. She wasn't in the kitchen. She wasn't in the doorway fixing her hair into that messy bun. She wasn't kneeling next to Rosie's bookshelf organizing the fairy tale books in alphabetical order, even though I told her it was pointless because Rosie would destroy the system in an hour. The stillness hurt more than noise ever could. Her absence was loud. In the late afternoon, I opened the small safe where I kept important things. My wife's necklace. Rosie's hospital wristband from the day she was born. A note from my wife that said in shaky handwriting, "Be patient. Be kind. Be home." And tucked in the corner was the tiny box I had given Sienna. The cheap shoes. She had left them behind. At first I thought she forgot them, but then I realized she didn't. They were her first gift from me, and she couldn't take them into the world her father dragged her back to. They didn't fit in that world. They only fit here. With us. My throat tightened. I closed the box and leaned against the wall as everything came crashing down. It wasn't romantic grief or dramatic heartbreak. It was quieter, heavier, the kind that sinks into your bones and makes your chest feel too small. That night, Rosie crawled into my bed, tears soaking my shirt as she whispered. She didn't say goodbye. I held her until she fell asleep. And when she did, I whispered the truth. I couldn't say out loud. She wanted to baby. She just didn't know how without breaking. For the first time in years, I felt the old fear returning, the one that whispered that whenever something good found me, it never stayed. I stared at the ceiling until my eyes burned. Then, I made myself a promise. If she ever came back, even for a second, even with fear in her eyes and her world falling apart behind her, I would not let her walk away, feeling alone again. Rosie needed her. And maybe, though I didn't want to admit it yet, so did I. The sickness started small the way storms always do, with signs so ordinary you almost convince yourself they mean nothing. And that first night when Rosie tugged at her blanket and whispered that she felt cold, I tucked her in tighter and kissed her forehead, telling myself the warmth I felt was just from her bath. Not a fever creeping up beneath her skin, but by morning her cheeks were flushed, her breaths shallow and uneven, as if they were trying to climb out of her little body. I lifted her gently and felt the heat scorching through her pajamas, hotter than anything a 6-year-old should burn with, and panic rose in my throat so fast it nearly choked me. She coughed a sharp, rattling sound that bent her small body forward. Daddy, my chest hurts, she whispered, her voice thin, like paper tearing. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys, wrapped her in her blanket, and carried her to the truck, her head against my shoulder, still too heavy. The drive to the ER felt like it took hours, even though I blew through every yellow light I could without completely losing my mind. Inside the emergency room, fluorescent lights buzzed with a coldness that made everything feel even more terrifying, but they took her from my arms instantly. EMTALA meant no child got turned away at the door, and watching the nurses lift her onto a small bed made my knees buckle with helplessness. A nurse clipped a pulse ox monitor on her finger, frowned and whispered something to another nurse that I wasn't meant to hear. Low oxygen. I paced as they worked, placing a small mask over her face, adjusting wires, taking vitals, trying to find a vein tiny enough for an IV. When she whimpered for me, I nearly tore the curtain down to get back to her. After what felt like forever, they moved her to a room and a doctor finally came in, holding a chart with the kind of expression that makes a parent forget how to breathe. We're concerned about her breathing and the fever's too high. We need more tests, blood work, chest imaging. My heart stopped when he added quietly, without insurance, some of these will require a deposit. How much? My voice cracked like dried wood. The billing clerk came in, flipping through her screen, barely glancing at me before saying, about $3,500 to start. It depends on what the doctor orders. We can set up a payment plan if... She paused when she looked up and saw my uniform, saw the exhaustion in my face, and something judgmental flickered across her features. Sir, can you afford that? I swallowed. Just do the tests, please. She's getting worse. The woman exchanged a look with her coworker, a look I'd seen 1,000 times at work, the look people give when they think they understand the limits of a man like me. A man who works nights sweeping streets. A man who counts grocery dollars. A man who probably can't save his own child. Rosie's breathing became ragged and dread washed over me until I thought I would collapse right there on the linoleum floor. I squeezed her hand, feeling how limp it was, how the spark she always had dimmed to a flicker. Daddy, she whispered through the oxygen mask. Am I in trouble? No, sweetheart, I said, brushing her curls back, my voice shaking. You're okay. I'm right here. When the nurse left the room, I sank into the chair at her bedside, burying my face in my hands. I had nothing left to sell. No savings, no backup. I had already pawned everything worth anything after Mary died. I felt the walls closing in, squeezing the air out of me, just like whatever was attacking Rosie's lungs. I tried calling the landlord, asking if he'd advance the next month in exchange for handyman work. No answer. I called my foreman at sanitation, asking if there was any overtime or emergency pay. He sighed, said budgets were frozen. I hung up and just stared at the floor, trying to figure out how a father was supposed to choose between debt and his daughter's life. When the billing clerk returned with a clipboard, I signed whatever she put in front of me, not even reading the terms. I didn't care if they took the truck or the house or my life. They could have it all if they kept Rosie breathing. Then her body jerked weakly in the bed as she coughed again, tears leaking from her closed eyes. I stood so fast the chair toppled behind me. Please, I begged the nurse who came in. Please help her. She's all I have. The nurse softened for a moment, adjusting Rosie's mask, brushing her hair gently. We're doing everything we can. But the fear stayed thick and suffocating. When the nurse left the hallway, lights dimmer now with the shift change, my legs gave out, and I sank to the floor beside Rosie's bed, forehead pressed against the edge of the mattress. I could feel my daughter's warmth radiating through the blanket, burning, burning, burning. My voice cracked into a whisper. I can't lose you too. I didn't even hear footsteps. I didn't hear the door open. I didn't hear anything except the rapid beep of the monitor and the sound of my own blood pounding in my ears. Until suddenly a familiar voice broke through the chaos. Caleb. My head shot up. I thought I was hallucinating, but she was there. Sienna. Hair damp from rain. Breath unsteady. Eyes wide with fear, but steady with purpose. She stepped closer, her gaze locked on Rosie, then on me, and she said 5 words that shattered the room. Put everything under my name. And in that instant, the world shifted. I did not stand up at first. I could not. My legs were useless beneath me as I stared at Sienna standing in the doorway like she had stepped straight out of a memory I had been trying not to replay for days. She looked different. Tired, rain-soaked hair disheveled, but her eyes were the same ones that had sat at my kitchen table laughing with Rosie over burnt toast. She walked past me without waiting for me to find words and handed her credit card and ID to the nurse at the desk. "Everything goes under my name," she repeated clearer this time, her voice steady in a way that made the staff stop moving for a second. "Room charges, medication, tests, overnight care, all of it." The nurse blinked, processing, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Sienna turned back to me, and for the first time since she left, I saw fear in her eyes. Real fear, the kind that comes when someone you care about is dying, and you can do nothing but show up and hope it matters. I pushed myself to my feet, legs shaking. "Why? Why are you here?" The words scraped out of my throat. She looked at Rosie lying small and pale in the hospital bed, wires and tubes surrounding her like a cruel nest. "Because you shouldn't be alone for this," she whispered. "And because she shouldn't be either." A nurse entered and gently asked us to step aside while they adjusted the oxygen, but Sienna stood her ground until the nurse moved around her. She reached for Rosie's tiny hand, brushing her fingers lightly across the back of it. "Hey, sunshine," she murmured so faintly I almost missed it. "I'm here now." Rosie did not answer. She could not. Her breathing rattled the mask, fogging with each shallow exhale. But her little fingers twitched under Sienna's touch, and that alone made my chest tighten so painfully I had to look away. Sienna turned to me then, and I could see the guilt sitting heavy on her shoulders. "I shouldn't have left," she said. "I thought going back would protect you both. I thought leaving meant keeping you safe from my world, my father, the press, all of it." She shook her head. "But I was wrong. Leaving didn't protect anyone. It just broke all of us." I swallowed hard, feeling everything I had buried since she left suddenly clawing its way back up. "You didn't owe us anything," I said, trying to hold myself together. "You were never supposed to feel responsible." She stepped closer. "That's not true," she whispered. "I owed you honesty, and I owed Rosie more than disappearing overnight." She paused, breath trembling. I owed myself the truth, too. I stared at her, still fighting the urge to crumble into her arms and beg her never to leave again. "Why now?" I asked. "Why come back today?" She exhaled shakily. "Because when I walked into my father's house, everything was perfect and empty. And when I walked into your house, everything was imperfect and full. And somehow I realized I could handle losing him, but I could never forgive myself for losing you two." My throat tightened so sharply I had to brace myself against the edge of the bed. "But you left," I said quietly. "You chose him." She shook her head, fast eyes filling. "No. I chose fear. I chose pressure. I chose a life that felt familiar, not one that felt right." She stepped forward, closing the space between us. "But I am choosing differently now." The doctor came in just then. "Her fever is dropping a little," he said, glancing between us. "We'll wait on blood work to see how aggressive the infection is." Then he left us alone again, and I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Sienna sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb the wires. I watched her gently brush Rosie's hair off her forehead. Something broke in me seeing her there, fitting into our world, as if she had been born for it. I sat beside her. "I'm sorry," I whispered. She turned her head slowly. "For what?" "For doubting you," I said. "For thinking the worst when I found the necklace. For making you feel like you didn't belong." She shook her head immediately. "No, you weren't doubting me. You were protecting your daughter. That's not something to apologize for. That's something to admire." My chest tightened again, but this time with something warm. "And you?" I said quietly. "You came back." She nodded. "Because Rosie deserves someone who shows up. And so do you." The room was quiet, except for the soft beeping of the monitor. "Can I stay?" she asked after a long moment. "At least for tonight," I swallowed. "You don't even have to ask." She smiled a small, tired, genuine smile, the kind I had not seen since the morning she'd helped Lily build a Lego castle in my living room. The nurse brought 2 chairs and a blanket, and we sat beside Rosie's bed in silence. At one point, Rosie stirred her fingers, curling weakly toward the side Sienna was sitting on, and without hesitation, Sienna slid her hand underneath Rosie's. The grip was faint, but there. I leaned back in my chair, watching them, and something inside me unclenched for the first time in days. Hours passed. Every time Rosie coughed, Sienna flinched. Every time the monitor beeped irregularly, I felt her hand tense on the armrest beside me. And sometime past midnight, when the hallway lights dimmed and the hospital fell quiet, she whispered, "Caleb, I'm not going anywhere this time." I turned my head toward her, the weight of her words settling deep in my chest. "Good," I whispered back, "because I don't think I could lose you twice." And for the first time since she left, I believed the world might just give us another chance. I did not expect the next morning to feel so heavy. But something about the way Sienna stared at her buzzing phone told me trouble was already waiting outside the hospital walls. She stepped into the hallway to take the call, and even from inside Rosie's room I could hear Winston Harrington's voice, sharp-clipped and cold enough to lower the temperature of the entire pediatric floor. When she came back in, she was pale, holding the phone like it had burned her. "He's here," she whispered. My stomach tightened. "Here, as in the hospital?" She nodded once, eyes full of dread. "He said if I don't meet him downstairs, he'll come up. I didn't want her to go alone." I told her that. She insisted she had to face him herself. So I walked beside her down the hallway, but when we reached the elevator, she said, "Caleb, stay." I wanted to argue, but the look in her eyes wasn't fear anymore. It was resolve. So I waited. I watched the elevator doors close around her, swallowing her small figure as though the building itself was testing her courage. I took the stairs 3 at a time, my heart pounding. I didn't go all the way down, just far enough to see the lobby without being seen. Winston stood in the center of the room like a monument carved from cold marble. Perfectly tailored coat, silvered hair expression carved from granite. 2 men in suits flanked him. Sienna approached slowly, her steps soft but steady. I couldn't hear everything from where I stood, but the acoustics carried enough. "You disappeared for days," Winston's voice echoed. "Your sister called me crying. Your family is humiliated. This stunt ends now." Sienna didn't flinch. "It wasn't a stunt," she said louder than he expected. "I told you I needed space. Space to hide in a janitor's shack," Winston snapped, almost laughing. "Space to play pretend with a man who cannot offer you anything." My fists clenched at my sides, but I forced myself to stay out of sight. This wasn't my fight. This was hers. "He offered me humanity," Sienna said. "He offered me honesty. He offered me safety when I was terrified." Winston scoffed. "Safety?" "With a man scraping by on trash routes and night shifts." She shook her head. "You don't know him?" "I know enough," Winston said, voice like steel. "I know the type, the desperate kind clinging to whatever falls into their lap." He never asked me for anything, she fired back. "He didn't even want my last name. He didn't want a thing from me." Winston stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You think I'm blind? You think I don't know what this is? A lonely man sees a vulnerable heiress." "Stop," Sienna said sharply. "Stop reducing every person who isn't in our tax bracket to something dirty." Winston's jaw flexed. He wasn't used to being challenged. "You are my daughter," he said coolly. "You will come home." Sienna crossed her arms. "You don't get to order me like you order your board. I am protecting you." From what she demanded. From a life where I have to earn my way. From people who don't bow when they say my name. From having to admit our world is shallow and lonely and suffocating. Winston's eyes narrowed, rage and confusion warring beneath the surface. "I raised you to have standards." "No," she said quietly. "You raised me to have cages." There was a pause. For the first time, Winston looked unsure. "You left?" he said softer. "You left without a word." Sienna inhaled shakily. "I left because you didn't see me. You saw a version of me that fit your plans. I saw a daughter who would never have to struggle." Winston said, frustration thickening his voice. "Struggle makes you feel alive," she whispered. "I didn't know that until I was washing towels for 8 hours straight. Until I burned breakfast in a kitchen the size of your closet. until a little girl hugged me like I mattered more than anything she had. Winston swallowed hard. His voice cracked for the first time. Did I really make you feel like you didn't matter? Sienna's eyes filled. Not enough to choose my life. Only yours. Winston closed his eyes a moment, then opened them again, the storm inside him barely contained. Do you love him? He asked. The entire lobby stilled. Sienna didn't hesitate. Yes, she said. I love him. I love his daughter. I love the version of myself I get to be with them. Winston looked down at the floor, and for a breath, he wasn't a billionaire. He was a father losing the last thing he cared about. He can't give you anything I can, he said weakly. She stepped closer. You're wrong, she whispered. He gives me everything you never did. Peace, freedom, truth, a place to belong. Winston's voice was barely audible now. So you choose him. I choose me, she corrected. I choose what makes my soul quiet. He stood perfectly still for several seconds, jaw trembling. Then he looked up toward the second floor, straight toward the ICU wing where Rosie slept. Is she doing better? He asked. Sienna blinked, stunned. She's stable, she managed. Winston nodded once. Good. He tucked his hands into his coat pockets, posture stiff pride, cracked but not shattered. Tell him. He began, but his voice wavered. He cleared his throat. Tell him he's lucky. She gave a small, trembling smile. No, she said gently. I'm the lucky one. Winston stepped back, gestured to his men, and walked toward the exit. No demands, no threats, no orders. Just a man learning for the first time how to let go. Sienna watched him leave, and then she turned, searching for the stairwell. Searching for me. When I finally spotted her coming up the stairwell, her eyes still glassy from the confrontation with her father, something inside me steadied for the first time in days. She walked toward me slowly, as if afraid I might disappear if she moved too fast. He's gone, she whispered. I nodded, and for a moment we just stood there in the hospital hallway, two people who had been bruised separately but somehow patched together by the same small child sleeping down the hall. Sienna stepped closer. Rosie? She asked. Resting, I said quietly. Fever's down a little. Relief washed across her face, but then something else crept in: uncertainty. Guilt. Longing. She glanced toward the window where the rain streaked down the glass like soft fingers tapping. Caleb. He knows, she murmured. About us. About everything. She nodded. He asked if I loved you. My heart stuttered. And, what did you say? She looked up, eyes steady. I told him the truth. My breath caught, but I didn't push her to repeat it. I couldn't. Not now. Not when it felt too big to touch. Instead, I guided her back toward Rosie's room. When she stepped inside and saw my daughter curled on her side, small hand gripping the stuffed raccoon Sienna had given her, something melted in her expression. She knelt beside the bed and brushed a strand of hair from Rosie's forehead, whispering something I couldn't hear. But Rosie must have felt it because her tiny fingers loosened and her breathing softened. Watching them, I felt something crack open in my chest, something warm, something terrifying, something alive. When we left the room, Sienna didn't let go of my hand right away. Her fingers lingered soft and searching. Caleb, she said finally, can we go home? Not my home. Yours, ours. I wasn't sure how to respond. The house is a mess, I said quietly. Roof leaks when it rains. The heater's old. The kitchen sink rattles. She smiled. I don't care. I don't have money, I said. Not real money. Not the kind you're used to. She shook her head. Caleb. I grew up with marble floors and chefs and drivers, and I have never felt as safe in a mansion as I did sitting on your torn-up couch, hearing Lily laugh. I felt my throat tighten. It hit me then, she didn't want comfort. She wanted belonging. We signed Rosie's overnight form and walked out of the hospital together. Dawn was just breaking, painting the sky with streaks of gold and lavender. The air smelled like wet pavement and fresh beginnings. I drove us home slowly, half afraid I might wake up in the middle of that hospital hallway and realize none of this was real. When we pulled up to the trailer, the porch light was still off. I held the door open for her, suddenly nervous. The house felt small, too small for what she deserved, but she stepped in as if she were coming back to her favorite place in the world. She exhaled, long and soft. "It smells like pancakes," she murmured. I laughed. "That's Rosie. She thinks pancakes fix everything." She looked at me, eyes glowing. "She gets that from you. I didn't know where to put my hands. I didn't know where to stand." She walked toward me slowly, like she could sense every thought tripping through my head. "Caleb," she said gently, "you don't have to act different with me. I'm not porcelain." "You're not a stray storm victim either," I replied. "You're a Harrington." "I'm Sienna," she corrected softly. "Just Sienna. The girl who burned your eggs, ruined 3 of your towels, and learned how to fold sheets because you stayed up with me until 1:30 in the morning." Her eyes grew glassy again. "You didn't judge me when you knew nothing about me. Don't start now that you know everything." I swallowed hard. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small brown paper bag. "These are for Rosie," she said. "Real blueberry muffins. I woke up before dawn to bake them." She paused, then added quietly, "And I didn't come to stay the night." My breath caught. She took one small step forward. "I came to stay, if you'll have me." Something in my chest shifted like the last piece of a puzzle sliding into place. "Sienna," I said slowly, "we don't have much." She shook her head, smiling through the tremble of her lips. "I had everything, Caleb. Money, a name, a future handed to me on a silver platter, but I never had a kitchen with a child laughing in it. I never had someone make me feel seen without asking for something in return. I never had a home that felt like it loved me back." She reached for my hand. I took it, feeling the world steady beneath my feet. Then a tiny voice came from the hallway. "Emma." We both turned. Rosie, still groggy and pale, but awake, was standing there clutching her raccoon plush. Sienna rushed forward, kneeling so they were eye level. "Hi, Sunbeam," she whispered. "I brought muffins." Rosie threw her arms around Sienna's neck. "Are you staying forever?" Sienna looked back at me, asking without words. I nodded, not because I was confident, not because life would magically become easy, but because for the first time since my wife died, hope didn't feel like a stranger. Sienna turned back to Rosie, smiling through tears. "Yeah, kiddo," she whispered. "Forever sounds good." And just like that, the house wasn't empty anymore. It was full of breath, full of warmth, full of something I had forgotten how to feel. A beginning. 2 months later, on a crisp Oregon Saturday morning, the kind where the cold air bites your cheeks, but the sun warms every place it touches, I found myself standing beside the old pickup truck I had owned for 12 years, the one whose paint had long surrendered to time. Only now it looked different. Not newer, not shinier, but alive. Sienna had painted wooden signs with careful hands, each brushstroke filled with a kind of hope I had not known in years. Caleb's Comfort Kitchen. The sign read in cheerful hand lettering with smaller words underneath "Warm food for warm hearts." The scent of pancakes drifted from the griddle we had rigged in the back of the truck, sizzling beside a pot of coffee that smelled like a hug. Rosie hopped from foot to foot beside us, handing out napkins and small stickers shaped like raccoons, her giggles carrying over the hum of the small marketplace. Families wandered by, couples holding hands, dog leashes tangling underfoot. The world felt softer than it had in a long time. I watched Sienna as she flipped a pancake with more confidence than she had the day she splattered eggs across my kitchen. Her hair was tucked under a baseball cap, her cheeks warm from the heat of the griddle. She caught me watching and grinned. "Don't even say it," she said. "Say what?" "That I look like a runaway heiress slumming it in a food truck." I laughed. "Actually, I was going to say you look happy." She paused, really paused. Then she looked at the sky, then at Rosie, then at me, her voice soft when she answered, "I am." It struck me then how far we'd come. The girl who once stood shaking and barefoot in the rain at 2 in the morning was now building a life beside me, not because she had to, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she wanted to, because she chose us. Around noon, when the crowd thinned a little, I stepped back to stretch my hands. My shoulder ached from lifting the heavy griddle earlier, and I rubbed it with a wince. Sienna noticed immediately. "Sit," she ordered gently. "I've got it." She handed the spatula to Rosie, who squealed in delight as if being promoted to junior chef was the greatest honor in the world. I lowered myself onto the truck's tailgate, watching Sienna run the stand like she'd been born to do it. When I first met her, she flinched at the sound of sirens, clutched her duffel bag like it was armor, and wore exhaustion like a second skin. But here, under this sun, in this little market, she looked unafraid. She looked free. A few minutes later, Rosie scampered over and climbed into my lap, resting her head on my chest. I wrapped my arms around her, kissing the top of her hair. "Daddy," she whispered, "this is the best job in the world." I smiled. "Because of pancakes. Because we're together," she said simply. I swallowed hard. The simplest truths always cut the deepest. That was when I noticed him. Winston Harrington. He stood a little distance away, hands in his coat pockets, watching without moving. No bodyguards, no polished car. Just a father looking at something he didn't understand, but maybe wished he did. My stomach knotted. I didn't want a scene, didn't want a repeat of the cold confrontation that had torn Sienna away from us the first time. But he didn't approach. After a long minute, he stepped forward, placed an envelope on the corner of the food stand, and nodded politely to me. I picked it up with a frown. Inside was a neatly folded check. Not money for us, not a bribe or a payoff. It was made out to Rosie Turner, for her future education, for her dreams, for whatever life might ask of her someday. My throat closed. Winston didn't wait for a thank you. He simply tipped his head toward Sienna as if acknowledging the woman she had become, and walked away with his hands still in his pockets, shoulders softer than I'd ever seen them. I slipped the envelope into my jacket without a word. Sienna didn't ask what he'd left. She just smiled faintly as if she already knew it wasn't a goodbye. The afternoon rolled on. We handed out the last of the muffins as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in soft orange. Rosie curled up under the stand, drawing pictures of our little truck with crayons, while humming to herself again something she hadn't done for weeks after Sienna left the first time. When we finally packed up, Sienna leaned against the truck beside me. We watched the sky fade into purple. She nudged my arm. "Do you ever think about how strange it is," she asked, "that everything changed because you stopped for a stranger at 2 a.m? I exhaled slowly. "Sometimes the whole world shifts because of one small choice," I said. One door opened. One yes instead of no. One moment of not looking away. Sienna slid her hand into mine, warm and certain. "Sometimes the miracle is just someone choosing to see you." I looked at her. This woman who had walked out of wealth and walked into our small, imperfect life with more courage than I could ever imagine. This woman who didn't need a castle because she had chosen a home. And I realized she was right. Then Rosie ran over, grabbing both our hands with her tiny fingers. "Can we get ice cream?" she asked. I laughed. "Before dinner?" "Yes," she insisted. "Because we're happy today." Sienna smiled, brushing a curl from Rosie's forehead. "You're right, Sunbeam. We are happy today." As we walked down the quiet street hand in hand, I felt something settle in me. Not excitement, not uncertainty. Something quieter, deeper, richer. Peace. Some people spend their whole lives searching the world for a miracle. Mine showed up at 2 a.m., soaking wet, terrified, and carrying the one thing money could never buy. A heart brave enough to love us back. If this story touched something in you, even just a small corner of your heart that still believes people can be better than their circumstances, then I want to thank you for staying until the end, because stories like this are not just entertainment for the night. They are reminders of what we often forget in the noise of everyday life, that kindness still matters, that love can show up in the most unexpected moments, that second chances can walk into your life soaked in rain at 2 a.m, and that sometimes a stranger becomes the person who stitches a broken family back together. Maybe you saw a piece of your younger self in Caleb, the tired parent doing everything he can just to keep the lights on. Or maybe you felt the ache of watching someone leave, the way he watched Sienna drive away, and yet somehow kept a place for her in his heart. Maybe you connected with Rosie, the little girl who just wanted someone to stay. someone to choose her, someone to show up when it mattered. And maybe you even recognized a bit of Sienna inside yourself, that quiet part, that longs to escape expectations, titles, and the life others planned for you, just to breathe and be seen for who you really are underneath all the noise. If any of that resonated with you, then you already understand why stories like this matter, because every family carries its own battle. Every person has a moment when life breaks them open, and every one of us is waiting for a small miracle to remind us that we are not alone in this world. That is why this channel exists, to bring you stories that do not just pass time, but stories that hold your heart for a moment. Stories that remind us of decency, forgiveness, unexpected love. The healing that happens when two worlds collide and choose to build something together. And if you want more of that, more stories that lift you up on the days when life feels heavy, stories that help you breathe easier, stories that remind you of the softness still left in humanity, then I hope you will take a second to subscribe, because you being here tells me you are the kind of person who believes in compassion, in second chances, in the quiet magic of people showing up for each other. And if you are that kind of person, then this channel is your place. Before you go, I want you to carry one thing with you tonight. A reminder from Caleb, from Sienna, from Rosie, from every moment they stitched themselves back into one little family. You do not need money to love someone. You do not need perfection to be worthy. And you do not need a grand life to create something beautiful. Sometimes the smallest lives are the richest ones. If this story warmed you, comforted you, or even made you feel seen for a moment, please give it a like so more people can find it. Share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe so you do not miss the next story. Until then, take care of yourself. Be gentle with your heart, and remember, miracles do not always knock. Sometimes they stand in the rain waiting for someone brave enough to open the door.